You are driving. It's 2:47 a.m. and you've been on the road for 6 hours. The interstate became a state highway about an hour ago, and now you're on something that barely qualifies as a road at all. 2 lanes, no street lights. Your phone lost signal 20 miles back, right around the time your gas tank dipped below a quarter tank. And then you see it, a town, or what's left of one. There's a gas station ahead, the kind with a single fluorescent light buzzing over 2 pumps that haven't been updated since Reagan was president. A hand-painted sign on the door says open, but half the letters are missing. There's a pickup truck in the lot with no license plates. Someone is sitting in the shadows by the ice machine, just watching. You slow down, and then you hear your own voice in your head, the voice of everyone who's ever loved you, saying, keep driving. Here's what they don't tell you about America's most dangerous places. They don't tell you that the scariest spots in this country aren't the ones with skyscrapers and crowded subway platforms. They're not the cities you've been warned about your whole life, the ones with names that politicians use as shorthand for chaos. The scariest places in America are the quiet ones, the small towns. The ones with populations under 30,000. The ones with a single stoplight and a diner that closes at 6 p.m. The ones where everyone knows your name and everyone knows you don't belong. Because here's the statistical reality that doesn't make it into the tourism brochures. Per capita, some of America's most violent communities aren't in Los Angeles or Chicago or New York. They're in places you've never heard of. Places where the population is so small that a single murder can spike the homicide rate to levels that would make Baltimore blush. Today, we're counting down 10 of those places. 10 small towns in America where the silence is louder than the sirens. 10 places where locals don't just warn you not to move there. They warn you not to stop for gas. This isn't fear-mongering. This is situational awareness. This is the geography of abandonment. This is what happens when a country leaves entire communities behind and then acts surprised when those communities break. So buckle up, and whatever you do, keep your doors locked. Before we dive in, I need you to do something, not for the algorithm. Algorithms don't care about you. Do it for yourself. Hit subscribe. Turn on notifications. Because if you're the kind of person who wants to understand the real America, the one that exists between the coasts, in the cracks of the interstate system, in the places where the American dream went to die, then this is the channel for you. We're not here to scare you. We're here to prepare you. Knowledge is armor. Let's put some on. Newburgh, New York. The Hudson Valley's open secret. Drive an hour north of Manhattan, and you'll find yourself in the Hudson Valley, one of the most romanticized landscapes in America. This is where New Yorkers escape to. Weekend getaways, farm-to-table restaurants, antique shops, and apple orchards. The Instagram aesthetic is impeccable. Rolling hills, historic estates, views that could sell 1 million real estate listings. And then there's Newburgh. Newburgh sits right on the Hudson River with views that should be worth millions. The architecture is stunning. Victorian mansions, gilded age row houses, a historic waterfront district that preservation societies would kill for. On paper, Newburgh should be thriving. It's commutable to New York City. It has natural beauty, historic charm, and river access. It should be Beacon's twin, on or Cold Spring's older sibling. Newburgh, New York, population approximately 28,000, is one of the most dangerous small cities in the Northeast. While tourists flock to nearby villages for wine tastings and artisanal cheese, Newburgh struggles with gang violence, drug trafficking, and a poverty rate that would shock anyone who thinks Hudson Valley and imagines only pastoral tranquility. This is the town that proves proximity to wealth means nothing if the wealth doesn't reach you. Newburgh's story is a masterclass in how urban renewal can become urban destruction. In the 1960s and 70s, the city underwent aggressive slum clearance programs that demolished historic neighborhoods to make way for public housing projects. The factories that once employed the working class, hat manufacturing, textiles, shipping, closed or relocated. White flight accelerated, the tax base collapsed, and the public housing that replaced the demolished neighborhoods became concentrated poverty zones, isolated from opportunity. George Washington used Newburgh as his headquarters during the Revolutionary War. This is where he rejected the idea of becoming a king, where he issued the Newburgh Address and cemented the principle of civilian control over the military. One of the most important moments in American democratic history happened here. There's a museum about it. Tourists visit, learn about liberty and sacrifice, and leave without ever seeing the Newburgh that exists beyond the historic site. The Newburgh where the promise of American freedom rings hollow, where opportunity is as distant as the Manhattan skyline on a hazy day. Benton Harbor, Michigan, the town that watched its twin thrive and die. Benton Harbor sits on the eastern shore of Lake Michigan, directly across the St. Joseph River from a town called St. Joseph. And if you want to understand Benton Harbor, you first need to understand that relationship, because St. Joseph is lovely, quaint, median home values pushing $500,000, beaches, wine trails, a downtown that looks like it was designed by a Hallmark movie set decorator. Tourists flock there every summer. This is a town of approximately 9,000 people, and those 9,000 people live in conditions that would shock most Americans. We're talking about a community that has been systematically abandoned by industry, by government, and by everyone with the means to leave. Whirlpool, yes, the appliance company, was once headquartered here, or employing thousands. The jobs left, the headquarters technically remains, but it's a ghost of what it was. And when the jobs left, so did everything else. Benton Harbor's violent crime rate consistently ranks among the highest in Michigan and the nation. Estimates place it at approximately 1,400 violent crimes per 100,000 residents, roughly 5 times the national average of 380. The property crime rate is similarly catastrophic. The poverty rate sits around 45%, with a median household income of approximately $18,000. In a state where the median income exceeds $65,000, Benton Harbor is a statistical outlier so extreme it warps the curve. You're driving through Benton Harbor on your way to wine country. Maybe you missed a turn. Maybe your GPS is glitching. Suddenly, you're not on the charming streets of St. Joseph anymore. You're on a road where every third house is boarded up, where the sidewalks have cracks so deep they've become trenches. You pass a corner store with bars on every window. There's a group of young men on the corner, not doing anything illegal, just existing, just living their lives, but you feel your hand instinctively move toward the door lock button, and then you hate yourself for that instinct, because you realize you're afraid of poverty, you're afraid of what America has done to these people, and you're projecting that fear onto them instead of onto the system that created this place. You drive on, you get to the winery, you drink a $20 glass of Pinot Grigio, you don't talk about what you saw. Benton Harbor is home to the Jack Nicklaus designed Harbor Shores Golf Course, Oz APGA caliber facility that has hosted the Senior PGA Championship. Millionaires fly in on private jets to play a round of golf in a town where the median income wouldn't cover 2 months of country club dues. The course was supposed to spark an economic renaissance. It didn't. The money stays on the fairways. It doesn't cross the river into the neighborhoods where children walk past abandoned houses to get to school, if the schools are still open. Pine Bluff, Arkansas, where the cotton was king and crime took the throne. Drop down into the Arkansas Delta, and you'll find Pine Bluff, a city that, depending on how you measure population, might not technically qualify as a small town, but certainly feels like one. The metropolitan area claims around 85,000 people, but the city proper has shrunk to under 40,000, and it's those urban boundaries where the crisis concentrates. This was once a cotton hub, a railroad junction, a place where money flowed and mansions were built. The University of Arkansas at Pine Bluff still stands, a historically black university with a proud legacy. Pine Bluff has earned the grim distinction of ranking among the most dangerous cities in America for years running, only consistently appearing on FBI crime statistics lists despite its relatively small size. The local newspaper runs stories about shootings with a frequency that suggests desensitization. The downtown is pockmarked with empty storefronts. The economic base has eroded to the point where the remaining institutions, the university, the hospital, the prison, are essentially the only employers left. According to FBI uniform crime reports and state-level analyses, Pine Bluff's violent crime rate has historically exceeded 1,500 per 100,000 residents, sometimes climbing higher. That's roughly 4 to 5 times the national average. Property crime rates are similarly elevated. The poverty rate sits around 28%, significantly higher than the national average of roughly 11%. Median household income hovers around $28,000. East compared to the national median of over $74,000. Pine Bluff's story is the Delta story. Cotton mechanization eliminated agricultural jobs. The factories that replaced them left for cheaper labor overseas. The young people who could leave did leave. For Little Rock, for Dallas, for anywhere with opportunity. What remained was an aging population, a shrinking tax base, and a drug trade that stepped into the economic vacuum. Interstate 530 connects Pine Bluff to Little Rock, and that highway has become a corridor corridor for trafficking. When legitimate economy fails, illegitimate economy thrives. It's not a mystery, it's mathematics. Pine Bluff hosts an annual regional tourism campaign called A Great Place to Live, Work, and Play. The slogan appears on billboards along the highway. You pass them as you drive through blocks of abandoned houses. You see them reflected in the windows of shuttered businesses. Somewhere, a marketing committee approved that slogan. Somewhere, someone got paid to write it. The residents know better. They've stopped believing in slogans. They're too busy surviving. Chester, Pennsylvania, the town that God and Philly forgot. Only 15 miles from downtown Philadelphia, Chester, Pennsylvania exists in a geographic paradox. It's close enough to a major metropolitan area that it should benefit from economic spillover. It's accessible enough that commuters could, in theory, live here and work in the city. It has waterfront property on the Delaware River, for crying out loud. And yet Chester has spent decades rotting from the inside out, a testament to how proximity to prosperity means nothing if the structural racism and disinvestment are deep enough. This is a town of approximately 32,000 people, predominantly Black and Latino, surrounded by Delaware County suburbs where the median income is more than 3 times higher. And the disparity is so stark that driving from Chester into neighboring towns feels like crossing an international border. One moment you're passing check-cashing stores and vacant lots. The next you're in tree-lined neighborhoods with Audis in the driveways. Chester's violent crime rate has been estimated at over 2,000 per 100,000 residents in peak years, more than 5 times the national average. The murder rate, specifically, has rivaled that of cities 10 times its size. Poverty afflicts approximately 33% of the population. The median household income is roughly $29,000, less than half the Pennsylvania state median. These aren't anomalies, these are entrenched conditions that have persisted for decades. Chester was an industrial powerhouse in the early 20th century, shipbuilding, manufacturing, textiles. Then came deindustrialization, white flight, and the construction of Interstate 95, which carved through the city and accelerated the exodus of anyone with means. What replaced industry was a trash-to-energy incinerator, a sewage treatment plant, and other environmental hazards that wealthier communities refused to host. Chester became a dumping ground, literally. The environmental justice violations here have been the subject of federal lawsuits. The residents breathe worse air, drink worse water, and face higher cancer rates than their suburban neighbors, and when people are sick and poor and abandoned, crime fills the void. Chester is home to PPL Park, now called Subaru Park, home of the Philadelphia Union, a major league soccer team. On game nights, thousands of suburban fans drive into Chester, park in heavily secured lots. Walk to the stadium, cheer for 90 minutes, and leave. They don't stop at local businesses. They don't explore the neighborhood. They exist in a bubble of security guards and designated walkways, and then they return to their safer worlds. The stadium was supposed to revitalize Chester. It didn't. It just created an island of wealth in a sea of poverty, visible but unreachable, like a mirage in the desert. East Chicago, Indiana, the steel town that rusted from the inside. Not to be confused with Chicago proper, though the confusion is understandable. East Chicago, Indiana, sits on the southwestern shore of Lake Michigan, in the armpit of the greater Chicago metropolitan area. This is a city of approximately 28,000 people, predominantly Hispanic, crammed into 16 square miles of land that has been polluted, industrialized, and abandoned in roughly that order. For most of the 20th century, East Chicago was steel country. Inland Steel, Youngstown Sheet, and Tube. Arcelor Middle, these were names that meant jobs, meant pensions, meant the American dream made manifest in molten metal. The work was brutal, dangerous, and essential. Generations of families built their lives around the mills. And then globalization happened. Automation happened. The steel industry didn't die, it just stopped needing humans. And East Chicago, which had bet everything on those mills, found itself holding losing cards. You're attending a conference in downtown Chicago, and you've booked a cheap motel in East Chicago because Airbnb showed you pictures that looked acceptable. You realize your mistake when you arrive. The neighborhood looks nothing like the photos. The motel itself is fine, clean enough, functional, but the walk to the nearest restaurant is a journey through decay. You pass a vacant lot where a shopping center center used to be. A group of teenagers are gathered around a car, music blasting. They look at you, not with hostility, just with the mild curiosity of people who don't see many strangers walking here. You nod, they nod back. You get your food, a taco from a truck that's genuinely delicious, might be the best taco you've ever had, and you walk back to your motel eating as you go. The next morning you check out early. You never come back. East Chicago is located in Lake County, Indiana, which is also home to some of the most affluent suburbs in the state. Schererville, Munster, St. John. These are communities with excellent schools, low crime rates, and median incomes well above the national average. They're 15 minutes away by car. They might as well be in another dimension. The children of East Chicago and the children of Munster grow up in the same county, but they grow up in different Americas. One America has lead in its soil, the other has lead in its pencils. Saginaw, Michigan, the city the auto industry built and abandoned. Population, approximately 43,000 and falling. If Detroit is the poster child for American industrial decline, then Saginaw is Detroit's little sibling, less famous, equally devastated, and often forgotten in conversations about urban decay. This is a city that General Motors once called home, a city where the American automobile industry was forged in the heat of factories that ran 3 shifts and employed entire neighborhoods. My grandfather worked in a Saginaw plant. His father probably did too, and their sons expected to follow, until the plants closed. Saginaw today is a landscape of absence. Absent jobs, absent people, absent hope. The downtown has vacancies that have been vacant so long they've become permanent. The neighborhoods are patchworks of occupied houses interspersed with burned out shells. The population has dropped by more than half since 1960, and every year more people leave. Saginaw has consistently ranked among the top 10 most violent small cities in America. The violent crime rate has been estimated at 2,000 or more per 100,000 residents, approximately 5 to 6 times the national average. The murder rate in particular has been extraordinarily high for a city this size. Poverty afflicts around 36% of the population. Median household income is roughly $27,000, compared to the Michigan state median of over $60,000. General Motors, that's the short answer. General Motors came, built factories, employed tens of thousands, and created a middle class out of thin air. And then General Motors rationalized, automated, outsourced, and left. When GM reduced its Saginaw presence, there was no plan B, no diversified economy, no educational infrastructure to retrain workers for a post-industrial world. What remained was a population with skills for jobs that no longer existed, mortgages on houses that were now worthless, and children who inherited poverty instead of opportunity. Drugs, first crack, then opioids, now fentanyl, stepped into the void. Gangs formed to control the drug trade. Violence followed. Saginaw is the birthplace of Stevie Wonder. Serena Williams was born here too. So was Ted Lindsay, one of hockey's greatest players. This city has produced extraordinary talent, artists, athletes, innovators who went on to achieve greatness on the world stage. But they all left. They had to. The city that birthed them couldn't sustain them. So they took their talents elsewhere, and Saginaw became a place people are from, not a place people stay. The city's most successful children are its absentee alumni, famous everywhere except the streets where they grew up. Bessemer, Alabama, where the iron ore ran out and everything else followed. Named after Sir Henry Bessemer, inventor of the Bessemer process for steel production, this small Alabama city was destined, or perhaps doomed, to be a company town from birth. Located just southwest of Birmingham in Jefferson County, Bessemer was built on iron ore and the dream of industrial prosperity. For a while, that dream held. The furnaces blazed. The ore flowed. Workers from across the South came seeking wages. Then the ore ran out. Well, not completely, but enough. The steel industry contracted, the furnaces went cold, and Bessemer, like so many American company towns, discovered that when your entire economy is built on a single industry, the collapse of that industry means the collapse of everything. Today, Bessemer is a city of approximately 26,000 people, struggling with crime rates that dwarf those of much larger cities. Bessemer's violent crime rate has been estimated at 2,500 or higher per 100,000 residents in some years, making it one of the most dangerous small cities in America by per capita metrics. That's roughly 6 to 7 times the national average. Property crime is similarly elevated. The poverty rate sits around 32%. Median household income is approximately $30,000, well below both the state and national averages. Imagine you're moving cross country and you've stopped in Bessemer to get a cheap motel for the night. You're tired. You've been driving for 12 hours. The motel is one of those budget chains that you've stayed at 100 times without incident. You check in. The clerk slides you the key card through a slot in the plexiglass divider, the kind you see at banks but not usually at motels. You ask if the area is safe. The clerk, a woman in her 50s with tired eyes, laughs, not meanly, wearily. Lock your car. Lock your room. Don't walk anywhere after dark. You'll be fine. You ask, what about before dark? She shrugs. Still lock your car. You sleep with your shoes on. Bessemer City Hall still proudly displays imagery of the steel industry. The furnaces, the ore, the workers, as if celebrating a heritage that left decades ago. The town motto is the Marvel City. The marvel apparently is that anyone still lives here at all. There's a small historical museum dedicated to the city's industrial past, a shrine to an era when Bessemer mattered, and when its name meant something in the national economy. Now it's a name known primarily to criminologists and urban decay enthusiasts, a case study in how quickly prosperity can collapse when it's built on a single foundation. Number 3, East Street, Louis, Illinois. The city that America uses as a warning. There's a reason politicians invoke East Street Louis when they want to scare people. There's a reason it appears in rap lyrics as a metaphor for urban despair. There's a reason that when people compile lists of America's most dangerous cities, East St. Louis is almost always near the top, despite its small population. This is the city that became synonymous with failure. And while that reputation is sometimes exaggerated, it's not unearned. East St. Louis, with a population of roughly 18,000, has recorded violent crime rates exceeding 2,500 per 100,000 in multiple years, sometimes higher. That's 7 to 8 times the national average. The murder rate in particular is astronomical for a city this size. Poverty affects approximately 42% of residents. The median household income is around $21,000. Property values have collapsed to the point where some homes sell for 4 figures, not as a down payment, as the full price. East St. Louis's decline began in the mid-20th century with the familiar pattern of industrial collapse and white flight. The meatpacking plants closed. The aluminum smelters closed. The National City stockyards, once the largest outside of Chicago, closed. The white residents fled to suburbs in Missouri and Illinois, taking the tax base with them. What remained was a predominantly black population, a corrupt political machine that extracted what little wealth remained, and a cycle of poverty so deep that it became generational destiny. But the root cause goes deeper. East St. Louis was never given a fair chance. As Illinois' tax structures favored Chicago and its suburbs. Federal transportation spending bypassed East St. Louis in favor of connections that served wealthier communities. The city became what sociologists call a sacrifice zone, a place that society implicitly decided was acceptable to abandon, and abandoned it was. East St. Louis hosted the 1917 race riots, one of the bloodiest episodes of racial violence in American history, where white mobs killed an estimated 100 to 200 black residents and burned entire neighborhoods. More than a century later, the descendants of both the victims and the perpetrators live within miles of each other, separated by a river and by median incomes that differ by a factor of 5. The violence of 1917 has never truly ended. It just changed form, became statistical, became systemic. It became something we measure in crime reports instead of mob actions. East St. Louis is what happens when a country commits atrocities and then forgets to atone. Selma, Alabama, where history happened and then stopped. Selma, Alabama is sacred ground. This is where John Lewis was beaten nearly to death on the Edmund Pettus Bridge. This is where the Voting Rights Act of 1965 was born in blood and courage. This is where some of the most important footage of the civil rights movement was captured. Images that changed the conscience of a nation. Selma should be a pilgrimage site, a place where Americans come to honor sacrifice and recommit to justice. Instead, Selma is dying. The city's population has collapsed from over 28,000 in 1960 to approximately 17,000 today, and still falling. The downtown, once vibrant, is now a checkerboard of vacant storefronts and struggling businesses. The Edmund Pettus Bridge still stands, but the neighborhoods surrounding it have crumbled. Tourism comes for the history, but it doesn't stay long enough to support an economy, and in the meantime, poverty and crime have filled the void left by hope. Selma's economy was built on cotton, and when cotton mechanized, the jobs disappeared. What came came next? Not much. There's no major university to anchor the city, no major employer to provide stable wages. The state government, dominated for decades by politicians who viewed Selma's black majority with hostility, directed investment elsewhere. Federal anti-poverty programs have come and gone without fundamentally changing the trajectory and the very history that makes Selma famous. The marches, the beatings, the protests has not translated into modern economic power. Tourists visit the bridge, take selfies, and leave. The gift shops sell commemorative postcards while the neighborhoods nearby crumble. The Edmund Pettus Bridge is named after a Confederate general and Grand Dragon of the Alabama Ku Klux Klan. Efforts to rename it have been repeatedly rejected, partly because some activists argue the name should remain as a testament to how far we've come, a reminder of the forces that were defeated. But driving through Selma today, you have to ask, were they defeated, or did they just change tactics? The bridge still stands, the name still honors a Klansman, and the black residents of Selma are still living in poverty, still suffering from violence, still waiting for a victory that feels incomplete. HELENA-WEST, Helena, Arkansas, where the blues were born and hope came to die. We end where American music began, the Mississippi Delta. HELENA-WEST, Helena, Arkansas. Population 10,000 and falling. Robert Johnson sold his soul here. Sonny Boy Williamson broadcast the first blues radio show here. This is sacred ground for music lovers worldwide. It's also one of America's most dangerous small cities. Let's talk numbers, because the numbers here are staggering. HELENA-WEST, Helena's violent crime rate has been estimated at 2,500 to 3,000 plus per 100,000 residents in recent years. That is approximately 7 to 8 times the national average. In some years, this city of 10,000 people has recorded more violent crimes per capita than Chicago, Baltimore, or St. Louis. The murder rate, specifically, has reached levels that would trigger federal intervention in larger cities. But HELENA-WEST Helena isn't large enough to attract that kind of attention. It suffers in obscurity. The poverty rate exceeds 40%. 4 out of every 10 residents live below the poverty line. The median household income is approximately $20,000 per year, less than a third of the national median. Unemployment is chronic. The schools are struggling. The hospital has faced closure threats. The infrastructure is crumbling. Cotton mechanization destroyed the economy. Sharecroppers became obsolete overnight. Those who couldn't flee north were abandoned. Drugs filled the void. Violence followed. The local whisper, a former resident, wrote, "Helena isn't a town anymore. It's a holding pattern. People waiting to leave or waiting to die." The King Biscuit Blues Festival draws thousands annually. Tourists celebrate the music born from suffering, then leave. The suffering continues. The community that gave America its voice has been rendered voiceless. Robert Johnson sang about hellhounds on his trail. In HELENA-WEST Helena, the hellhounds caught up long ago. They never left. So there you have it. 10 towns, 10 warnings, 10 places where the American dream went to die, or at least went to sleep and hasn't woken up yet. These are not random places. These are not unlucky places. These are places where specific decisions, by corporations, by governments, by generations of policymakers who looked the other way, created the conditions for collapse. Deindustrialization, disinvestment, discrimination, environmental poisoning, political abandonment. The through line is clear. When a nation decides that certain communities are expendable, those communities become expendable. Crime rises because hope falls. Violence increases because opportunity decreases. It's not complicated, it's just tragic. And the scariest part, these aren't anomalies, they're previews. They're what happens when the engine that powered a town stops running and no one builds a new engine. They're what happens when globalization and automation and policy neglect combine to hollow out entire regions. They're what's happening right now to small towns across the country. Towns that haven't made this list yet, but might in another decade. So what do we do with this knowledge? First, we pay attention. We stop treating urban decay as someone else's problem, something that happens over there to those people, because those people are us. They're our neighbors, our countrymen, our fellow travelers on this American experiment. Their collapse is our failure. Their suffering is our responsibility. Second, we demand better policies, better investment, better leaders who see small towns as something worth saving, not just flyover country to be ignored between election cycles. And third, we remember that every town on this list was wants something else. Saginaw was an automotive powerhouse. Selma was a battlefield for justice. These places had futures that were taken from them, and maybe, if we care enough to act, some of those futures can still be reclaimed. But for now, if you're driving through any of these places late at night, and your gas tank is getting low, and you see a dimly lit station with a half-lit sign and a pickup truck with no plates, keep driving, find the next town, lock your doors, and stay aware.